Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute delight to be here in Redlands with your organization. So many familiar faces. My dear friend Agnes, who, by the way, I need to give her credit because at the convention last weekend, she pronounced the first motion from the floor on Sunday morning to endorse President Trump from the California Republican Party. Just wonderful. Thank you, Agnes, for your courage. Unfortunately, they needed a 2/3 vote to get past the agenda, and so we weren't able to clinch it, but I'm so excited by what Agnes was able to do.
The roar in the room.
Oh, it was incredible. It was incredible. Clearly, overwhelmingly, the delegates at the weekend convention supported President Trump, as do I, because I think there's so much at stake for this country beyond just the issues, and I think President Trump is uniquely positioned to really turn the tide for us. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so thrilled to be here. I wanted to share a little bit about my personal background in politics and hopefully inspire many of you to stay in the fight, even against improbable odds, which was my case when I ran for city council and became mayor of a town that is 90% Democrat and 98% Hispanic. Think about that. That predicament that I found myself in. And I was able to be successful from a policy perspective and from an election perspective, and I want to be able to share a little bit of that story. I also want to thank Redlands Tea Party for the support last year when I ran for California State Treasurer. I was the Republican nominee heading into the November election, but in the primary there were other candidates vying for the Republican nomination, and Redlands Tea Party was one of my earliest supporters, and I'm just so thrilled by this warm embrace of my candidacy. I garnered 4.5 million votes in November, 43% of California state, and that rendered me the second highest Republican vote getter in the state of California. So very honored by that approbation. Anyway, my story begins in California. My parents are Mexican immigrants who settled in the Central Valley in the 1970s, first as farm workers, and then they upgraded their professional status to become factory workers in Vernon in Los Angeles County. I was born in the neighboring city of Cudahy in deep blue Los Angeles County. For reference, my neighboring city back there is Bell. Everybody's heard of the case of Bell, right? This was the town 10 years ago that featured a corrupt city manager who was paying himself $1.5 million a year in a town where the average income is $30,000. Think about that very disgusting violation of the public trust. My own city had a very similar episode of corruption 2 years later. The dollar signs were a little bit smaller, but the conduct no less egregious. The assembly member for that region affectionately refers to that entire corridor of cities as the corridor of corruption, believe it or not, because there's just so much mismanagement, a very troubled region. I was born against that backdrop. My parents were economically disadvantaged, although in many ways this is not unique. We all come from either personal experience or through our grandparents or parents. The idea of surviving economic disadvantage and doing better for your lot and bequeathing for your children a better opportunity to succeed. And so in many ways my story is very American, and I'm very proud of that. When I was 7 years old, I became a Republican, and that's a true story. 1984, do any of you remember who was running for president in 1984? Ronald Reagan against Walter Mondale, that's right. And my third grade teacher held a mock debate in the classroom and selected a young lady to represent Mondale, and I was selected to represent Ronald Reagan, very providentially. And the young lady stood up in defense of Mondale and proclaimed, "I support Mondale because my family is poor." And I stood up and responded, "I support Ronald Reagan because I don't want my family to be poor." And that's a true story. I remember being so absorbed under President Reagan's leadership. It was a special time to be a boy growing up in America because it just felt so exciting to be American. And maybe the Cold War had something to do with it. But I think as I look back on my ideological formation over my life, it begins with Christian values. I grew up in a traditional Catholic home, and then it evolved to include patriotism and love of country throughout the 80s. And then as I got older and learned economics and studied finance, I got a greater appreciation for the free market and for policies that affect our economy. I went to all of the local schools in Cudahy and Bell, all absolutely decrepit, which is one of the reasons, by the way, why I champion education reform and why I believe it is the next civil rights issue of our day, and why I also believe Republicans have the moral high ground on that issue, and it will be one obvious opportunity to bring Democrats and minorities from disadvantaged areas to come over to our side. We can do better on this issue, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely. So I survived a decrepit public education and was able to go on to Harvard and Stanford to obtain degrees in economics. In many ways, I was an intellectual refugee who was able to escape the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is one of the most corrupt school districts in America. And I was able to, have a good, successful career in finance. I worked abroad in New York City and for an investment bank on Wall Street. But in 2012, I decided to come back to California. Like most Mexican kids, I can't be away from my parents for too long. So I decided that I wanted to come back and be closer to my family. So I settled back in the family home, thinking very naively at the time that I would stay there for a few months before moving on to Santa Monica or one of the beach cities and carry on with a private life. Alas, there was a corruption scandal that afflicted that city within a few months of my relocation. And when that scandal came to that town, I resolved at that moment that I would support a good candidate for city council and then move on with my life. But when nobody stepped forward that was halfway decent, I had to look myself in the mirror and determine whether at that moment it was the right time for me to step forward. And it was not an easy decision. For those of us in this room that have been candidates, it comes with incredible self-sacrifice to run for office. And unless you're corrupt, if you're corrupt, getting involved in politics can be very lucrative. But for those of us that are honest, it does come with considerable self-sacrifice. And so for me, it was not an easy decision. But I prayed about it, and I determined at that time that it was appropriate for me to step forward. I'm a certified public accountant, I know finance, and I thought at least on finance issues that I could be helpful to my city. In 2013, I ran for city council. I was elected overwhelmingly with the approbation of the people and appointed mayor of the city unanimously. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it was a special time. It was like playing SimCity in real life. We fired the city manager, the finance director, the community services director, and we rebuilt a city from scratch. That's a true story. One of the first things I did as mayor was call upon the California State Controller to initiate a forensic examination of the city's accounts. This was necessary coming out of a corruption scandal because I needed a credible bill of health to introduce the greatest government reform measures in my city's history. But when the controller refused my invitation, his name was John Chung, who was running for governor at the time, and at that time, Cudahy wasn't even on the map. He was going after bigger fish, and he ignored me. Think about that. I went to the Los Angeles Times with a 10-page summary of findings that I uncovered through my own investigation, and the LA Times published an article, one of the few favorable articles about a Republican elected official. And as soon as it was published, the controller came knocking on the door and delivered the forensic examination that I was demanding. And I want that to be the first lesson here, that when you are up against a corrupt administration or a corrupt bureaucracy in whatever jurisdiction you reside, you can sometimes go around them to other agencies for assistance. And in this case, I was able to get support from the California State Controller, and he thanked me for my work and validated a lot of my concerns about the corrupt internal control environment of the city, which I focused on for remediation. It was very important. Most people don't appreciate just how important internal controls are. You can't really put a selfie to it or a nice Kodak moment to it, right? Because there's nothing in the background, but it's so absolutely important because internal controls mitigate the susceptibility of fraud. If you have solid, airtight procedures and policies, you can really stop corruption cold if you do it the right way. So for me, that was really, really important. And I'm very proud of what I was able to do in that regard. I also took on the corrupt public schools. I mentioned earlier that this is exceptionally personal to me because I think a lot of these schools are shortchanging the people, including the parents and the students especially. And so there was one set of public schools that was delivering 75% failure rates for the children. They couldn't read or write or perform basic arithmetic at grade level. Totally unacceptable. And I decided to do the unthinkable as mayor, ladies and gentlemen. I decided to hold public hearings on the quality of education in my city council chamber as mayor. Think about that. Most people in the political class said to me, Jack, stay away from the schools. You are not a school board member. That's what they said to me. But even though it was not within my formal jurisdiction, it was certainly within my moral obligation to get involved. And I did that, ladies and gentlemen. I held public hearings replete with testimony and speakers at the podium, and I indicted the local schools as failure factories. Within a few days, Los Angeles Unified School District summoned me to their headquarters in downtown LA, and within a few days after that, the principal of one of the troubled elementary schools was removed, and the rest of the corrupt administration followed course in short order, and I'm very proud of that. And that's the second lesson here, that you can accomplish some amazing things, ladies and gentlemen, if you just push the envelope a little bit. Again, even if it doesn't reside within the formal jurisdiction of your role, if you push the envelope, you can really accomplish some amazing things. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. I also took on taxes and fees in a working class community. I remember one of the popular strategies at the time was for city councils to get around Prop 13 by promoting parcel taxes. That's the same thing in effect, because they're going after property owners and against renters even, because there's a cascading effect through the economy. And so when my city council decided to promote these things, I organized the residents. Now think about this, a 90% Democrat city in the bluest region of the bluest state. But let me tell you, when government goes after the wallet so gallingly, even Democrats of good character or good ethics will rise against that corruption overnight. And we were able to defeat every single tax measure that came up in that city, and I'm very proud of that. I was also able to get involved in some of the neighboring cities and their tax measures and fighting them. In fact, in the city of Bell, notorious Bell, there was a tax measure there as well, a sales tax measure and a parcel tax measure, and I organized with their residents to defeat those measures, and to date, all of the city council members in Bell refused to talk to me because I derailed their tax measure, and I'm very proud of that. And I remember, Agnes, you were with us in Cudahy many times as well. The corrupt city council members there, all left-wing. I was the only Republican, by the way, in that city council, and in fact, in that entire region, I was the only Republican elected official. 7 cities to be exact, before the next Republican. And if you get rid of the rhinos, 9 cities. That's like no Republican between Redlands and Rancho Cucamonga. Think about that. So against that backdrop, I was able to do really some great things. One of the things that the council members decided to pursue at the time was a declaration of support for sanctuary city status with respect to criminal illegal immigrants. This was with respect to SB 54. I don't know if some of you remember that legislation, but at the time, several years ago, there was a proposal in state government to really nurture a warm relationship with criminal aliens so that they don't get processed through the immigration authorities after serving their term in county or state prisons. And of course, that should be beyond controversy. We should not be sympathetic to those kinds of criminal elements. But in my city, those council members decided to be sympathetic to that cause. Well, I told them, if you decide to move forward with this corrupt proposition, we're going to be on the map, and a lot of people are going to come to our city to protest what you're about to do. And I discouraged them from doing it. I voted against that. But lo and behold, sure enough, a lot of people started to come to the city, including many people from Riverside County and San Bernardino, and it was something, quite a spectacle. I was burned in effigy. I was called every imaginable epithet by the brown supremacists, as I call them. And let me tell you, I survived it, but it wasn't always easy. There were times late at night when I was in bed wondering whether it was all worth it. I remember even my own father asked me, Jack, is it worth it? You know, after getting all of the protests and all of the people threatening my life and going after my employer, I mean, it was a difficult experience for me. But ladies and gentlemen, every morning I would get up again and determine that it was the right thing for me to continue to fight. because I never wanted to give in to the other side and give them the ammunition to destroy other conservatives in the area. So I'm very proud of having put up a good fight on issues like that. I also took on the pro-life position. I proposed sanctuary status for unborn children in my city. I didn't get the support, but it was important for me to take a stand because I knew that I could inspire other residents to similarly stand up for justice. And that was also very important to me. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to leave you with just these thoughts, that even if you're the only Republican in your particular area, it is worth staying in the fight because you can inspire people around you, and if you push the envelope, you can really accomplish some amazing things. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute delight to be here with all of you. I want you to know that there's a revolution coming in this country and in this state. Don't get it started without me. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Jack. Anybody have asked the people that we up here? Any questions?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I just wanted to say that when we would go all the way from here, from San Bernardino County to Cudahy, to support you and fight your corrupt city council, we were called Nazis. We were called Nazi sons of Donald Trump. And God knows what else, until Antifa started showing up, and city council got out the back door. You, Jack, always stood up with character, integrity, and stood up for the right thing. I love my husband, Mark, but I love you second, because I always look up to you for your integrity and character. God bless you in your journey, and I hope you win.
Thank you very much. I did want to share very briefly that when I was running for city council the first time, again, against a corrupt political establishment, the people were sick and tired of corruption. There was one lady, and I always bring her up because I still think about her. She was about 80 years old at the time, Spanish speaker, didn't go to Harvard, doesn't read Edmund Burke or Adam Smith, just a simple woman. And she told me, Jack, I know I can trust you, is what she said to me. I know I can trust you. And ladies and gentlemen, I think about that woman often because I will never violate that trust. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alice, for your comment.
So, I heard you speak in San Gabriel, and one of the things that really impressed me about you was your action that you took. Now, all of us that are activists go before our board of supervisors or our city council. We get our 3 minutes, and we tell them what for. And I wanted you to share your plan when people were giving public comment, what you did.
Yes, yeah, I remember that the city council member, after a while, found me very annoying. And so they would try everything to undermine my ability to speak. They limited my amount of minutes to speak. They wouldn't let me speak a second time, so I had no opportunity to rebut. I would make a comment on a particular issue. The rest of the council members would address it, and they would never recognize me to rebut. Think about that. So you know what I started to do is, I started to submit a speaker card as a member of the public. And so I would be up at the dais, and I would come right down to the front, go to the podium, and address myself as a private citizen in the city. And it would give me an extra 3 minutes to speak. And I did that. And I think to this day, I think I might be the only city council member in the state of California that started doing that on a habitual basis. And it was so fun to annoy the other side. Thank you for noting that.
Josh?
Do you think it's possible to try and remove Gavin Newsom for running a candidate to replace Dianne Feinstein, who's not even a resident of California?
Oh yes, I think there is a basis to challenge that, and I hope that some folks might be interested in putting litigation together for that, because I think there's a valid argument. This woman, by the way, is very dangerous. She's an activist coming out of Maryland who is, makes some of the other candidates look like, warm allies of the conservative movement. This lady is just absolutely corrupt, and we need to stop her. And so we'll make a case next year for sure with our own candidates to at least expose this woman for the fraud that she is. She doesn't even live in California. She lives in Maryland and grew up in in I believe it was Arkansas or one of the southern states. So we've got really quite a battle ahead, but thanks for exposing that.
Issues.
I just want to say you're an inspiration.
Thank you.
Two, so next door to Val. I was actually a staffer, that's how I got into politics. For Mayor Lisa Romero. She did it all with the Republicans, so yeah, she found that.
Oh, State Senator Romero. No.
Lisa Romero.
Oh, for Bell.
Oh, Val.
Oh, yes.
Bell, yeah.
Yes.
And that's how I learned, and then I'm like, hey, I know what's going on. But she
Yeah.
spoke a lot about you, and I'm like, hey, I like this guy.
Oh, is that right?
So
Oh,
right now when
that's
you
great.
sat down, I'm like, oh my God, that's the legend.
Yeah.
So you are really inspirational, sir. Thank you. I'm from the same area.
Yes.
I mean, you look like, so I feel you, sir.
That's a
But
tough
question,
one.
why are you running for board?
Supervisor. So I got turned out of the city council last year. And by the way, I kicked myself out. One of the things I did when I was mayor is I pushed a term limits ordinance with approbation of the people. We had a formal initiative, and that passed with 90% of the vote, believe it or not. It's a winning issue, by the way, term limits. I think term limits should be extended to members of Congress as well. But let me tell you, I passed one of the strictest term limits ordinances in the state of California. And I stand by it because as good as you are, you should not be in an elected position for the rest of your life. You really shouldn't. Move on to other endeavors and give other people a chance. And so I stand by that decision. I got turned out last year, and in the year leading up to the conclusion, I told my constituents, you know, for a variety of reasons, I'm going to be moving on. You can't put all your eggs in my basket. You need to step up to the plate as well. And so I'm proud to have inspired others from that area to also run for office. So I'm very proud of that legacy. But it was the right moment for me and my family to move on. And I wanted to come to greener pastures, or redder pastures as it were. You know, I didn't want to live next to marijuana dispensaries and abortion clinics and homeless encampments and graffiti and crime that was completely out of control. So, I mean, it's a personal decision that I made. So I decided to come to Riverside County. I remember Southwest Riverside County very fondly when I was a candidate for treasurer, because I had so much strong support from Southwest Riverside County. And I won the district where I'm running in, by the way, with an estimated 2/3 of the vote. I won in Riverside County as well with 53% of the vote. And so when I moved to Southwest Riverside County, I knew that I wanted to get involved eventually. I did not initially target running for supervisor, but I have to tell you, as I got involved with so many organizations and patriots, people asked me to run for supervisor. And I looked at my 10 years of experience fighting the left-wing political establishment in deep blue Los Angeles County, and I started looking at things and trends in Riverside County, and let me tell you, there are flags that are coming up. And when I looked at the competitive landscape, I determined that there was no conservative in this race that was committed to government reform the way I had experienced my public service. And so for that reason, it would have been a shame for me to not answer the call. I prayed about it, and I feel the calling. You know, I look at things providentially as well. I don't think we're in our station in life by accident. I think God puts us in places at particular times because of opportunities to serve Him and serve each other. And I think there are other forces at play that have brought me to this moment. And it would be a shame for me not to answer the call. That's why.
Is anyone still running for that seat?
Yeah, there's another Republican running, that's right. I was in a candidate forum not too long ago, and I focused a lot of my comments on government reform and remediation of internal controls. And there are some things in Riverside County that I'm observing which is probably afflicting San Bernardino County as well. For example, I've identified a $10 billion unfunded pension liability in the county of Riverside, and nobody talks about this, because most politicians are afraid of the public sector unions. Now, I am pro-worker, no doubt about it, but I am very skeptical of the unions. They do a lot of harm and plunder of the taxpayers' treasury, and I think somebody needs to stand up for what's reasonable and sustainable economically. And so that's just one issue. I've also looked at the finances of Riverside County. I used to be an auditor of government agencies. I know the comprehensive annual financial report probably better than the finance director in the county. And let me tell you, when I observe that government is growing at 15 times the rate of population growth, that's a red flag. We should not be growing government out of proportion with inflation or with population growth, unless you have justifiable reason for one-time infrastructural development, for example. But when I looked at the county budget, increasing over $1 billion 1 year over the other, and most of it is compensation. In fact, we have dozens of bureaucrats in Riverside County that make $500,000 or more a year. Think about that. That was the first red flag in Bell. When people look at the corruption in Bell, what tipped off the media and the activists was actually compensation. That was the tip of the iceberg. And once you uncover the situation, is when you realize that there are corrupt government contracts, and that's what I want to focus on, is remediating the deficient internal controls in the county of Riverside. And I am prepared to do that. I have done it before. I know government accounting very well, and I have taken on forensic examinations in the past, and I owe it to the residents of Riverside County to fight for their interests before a corrupt county government, and I'm going to do that.
Right now, the Board of Supervisors is 3 Democrats, 2 probably fairly soft Republicans. So you flip that seat, it's 3-2 Republican, and if you get somebody like Jack in there, you may buck up the other two Republicans.
I think so.
You don't have to say it, but I will. Your Republican opponent, Jonathan Ingram, was a long time, he was the chairman of the Riverside County Republican Party, utterly, completely useless. He's loud, but he's useless. Then my friend Don Dix took over the party, and was really turning that around, making it into a useful organization. And when Don passed, Ingram came back in and immediately undid everything that Don had been doing. So he's loud, but he's useless. And we have a chance here to help elect someone who's really, really good for that position. Thank you very much. Alina.
Excellent, thanks.
That message was brought to you by, and Jack Guerrero approves that message. Alina.
Hi, Mr. Guerrero. Thank you for being here. Thank you for running. Your reputation precedes you. And in full disclosure, I am a member of the Riverside County, the Republican Party Riverside County, and I am the voter registration chair. So I am taking that job very seriously to turn out the vote, to vote for the most conservative candidate, even though I can't say that, but that's my heart's desire. First question, are you planning to run for higher office? And then the second more important question is, as a new supervisor, what would be your position on the Dominion machine issue, voter integrity, and election fraud? You know the situation there now. They're doing an audit because of the lawsuit that's going on against 3 of your colleagues that will be here.
That's right. You know, this is an exceptionally important issue, election integrity. And remember, I grew up as an auditor. I am wired to leave no stone unturned in everything I do as it relates to government. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, before I got involved in government, I was skeptical of government. Now that I've been in public service for 10 years, I'm even more skeptical of government because I see just how corrupt it is. And it has to do with deficient internal controls. Election integrity is right within the scope of internal control remediation that I'm seeking. What I want to do is make sure that we have airtight election systems in place to remediate the susceptibility of fraud taking place. And if any process in government needs to be absolutely remediated, it's elections, because that's foundational, that is constitutional, and we've got an obligation morally to ensure that our elections have the highest level of integrity. And so what I intend to do immediately upon installation is call for investigations, and not just investigations, forensic examinations of every single component in the information flow of election results. From the moment that a ballot is printed, what are each steps in the flow, and every element needs to be audited. If there is any room for fraud, it needs to be addressed immediately and closed cold. And so that's important, and I want to go wherever the facts take me. Look, a lot of people are focused on Dominion, and that's a key element. We need to focus on those systems, and there are ways that we can address it. You don't have to be an IT expert. You can default to IT audits to make sure that those systems are working properly. But beyond the systems, we also have a lot of touch points in that information flow that involve human error. And that needs to be addressed. That can be addressed now. You don't even need to be an IT specialist to make sure that when people touch a ballot, the integrity is preserved and supervised every step of the way in the most auditable trail possible. And so I support paper ballots as backups and as actually the principal way to proceed. And I think that there's a constitutional argument to defend that. And so I want to use whatever tool is at my disposal legally, but also using my hat as an auditor to make sure that every step in the information flow, remember, I did this from a financial perspective. Every step in the information flow needs to be airtight in terms of internal controls. The same discipline should apply to elections.
Regarding the vending machine, since we know that they accessed the machine from the intranet, I think the contract says that we can get our $23 million back. Would you be interested, would you pursue that on behalf of the citizens of Riverside County?
Yes, I think so. If there's any room for addressing a deficient system over which we were defrauded as citizens, then we have to use every legal option available to recover the damages for that experience. So it begins with audits and facts. That's step one, ladies and gentlemen. And let's go wherever the facts take us, and we need to do that and pursue it earnestly straight away.
Last question, make it a good one. Maybe a brief one too.
Brief one? Okay. First of all, my applause. You're absolutely a breath of fresh air for many of us who have been involved in a whole plethora of different ideas. Los Angeles County had a fire captain that was basically a lifeguard. It was total compensation package with health and welfare. It was over $500,000. What's your plans about this 90 at 30 and how they calculate these pensions? Sacramento is also issuing what are called pension obligation bonds. So you're financing in today's pensions on the backs of your kids,
Yes.
your grandkids. I mean, how is this possible? I mean, how can we justify giving health and retirement plans that no private sector offers?
That's right. It's absolutely corrupt, ladies and gentlemen. That's the truth. I'll give you the 1-minute overview on my specific plan for pension reform. I thought about this carefully. I wrote about this when I was a graduate student in economics, and so I have a good understanding. I was a pension auditor myself many years ago. So this is what I propose. Right now, about 15% of the budget in the county of Riverside is appropriated to shore up the funds. In a few years, I estimate within 5 years, that will encroach upon 25% of the general fund, because these obligations are becoming bigger and bigger. And as we raise compensation, remember, in Riverside County, $1 billion went to compensation increases. And that has a pernicious consequence on the back end because it affects the pension payouts. I mean, there are people that are benefiting at hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual payments through the pension program. Remember Robert Rizzo, he was the city manager in Bell, who is serving a 10-year prison sentence for corruption. Did you know that his pension is still intact? That's corrupt, because he earned that pension through corrupt means. And so that's unacceptable. Now, what I propose for Riverside County, and actually across the state, when I ran for California Treasurer, I proposed the same thing. We need to compartmentalize all participants in the pension program into 3 categories. The first is those that are already retired. I think for this particular group, we need to do the best we can to preserve the promised obligations that we have made. I think the legal argument against that is very, very difficult to make. And so I do propose retaining the obligations that have been already promised to those that are retired. To those that are new entrants into the public sector, we absolutely need to migrate to a defined contribution plan. This is the only way that we can sustain the program long term. And we can be very generous as a public agency with matching funds and other incentives and still make it sustainable on a pay-as-you-go basis. So that is very easy and non-controversial for new entrants into the public sector. Now, the most complicated element is the one in the middle, those that are current employees. Now, what I would say is that we should approach this from a hybrid perspective. Those that are closer to retirement, a greater percentage of their promised earnings should fall within what has been contractually agreed to. Those that are closer to the beginning of their career should have greater share of their promised obligations migrate to defined contribution plan. But for everybody who has not yet earned their deferred compensation, that should be subject to negotiation. Whatever you have earned in the way of deferred compensation, in other words, what you've accrued that you've already earned, that should be preserved to the extent economically feasible. But anything that you have not yet earned, that is prospective in nature, must be renegotiated with a view towards migration of a defined contribution plan. I've worked out the math on this, and it can work, but we have to come to the table with a good faith effort to get at a solution that's not going to make very many people happy. In fact, it will take significant sacrifice from all of the stakeholders involved. But there is a path, mathematically, to salvage this program. If we do nothing, let me tell you with mathematical certainty, the system will collapse. That's the truth.
Thank you, Jack, and appreciate you coming out and your patience tonight, and keep us, let us know how we can help you with your campaign. I think this is a race that where the activists and the patriots can make a difference in the outcome, and I think as demonstrated tonight, you can be a great supervisor if we get you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've got some information in the back table as well, so feel free to pick up a flyer, or if you feel positioned to do it. Of course, I welcome any financial support as well, but more than anything, your prayers as I enter this endeavor with earnestness hereafter. Thank you all. Thank you. God bless you.
Would you like to see this man in the governor's chair? Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Do we have a drawing tonight?
Good.